Hello everyone, good day to all of you. Hope you're all doing well. I wanted to spend some time today to talk about AK muzzle devices and specifically what type of effect they can have on precision. This is something that I've been testing quite a bit myself over the past several months and researching as well. And what I'm going to talk about here really could apply to pretty much any rifle and the muzzle device that you choose for it, but it's particularly pronounced, I've noticed, on AKs because of how, well, at least how most of them attach their muzzle device using a retaining pin. I know that, especially in the civilian market nowadays, there's a decent amount that just thread on like normal, for example, like an AR, but the traditional type, that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. So, starting with what I found. So, I have tested a ton of muzzle devices on just this channel in general, but especially on AKs, especially several years ago, back when I first started this channel, I was messing around with this build a lot and seeing what I really liked for a muzzle device. And for the longest time, I had settled on the Arsenal USA version of the AR M1 flash hider, which you can see I have mounted on this other build at the moment. And this is a very good flash hider as far as actual flash reduction and hiding capabilities. But one issue I found when I was doing a lot of precision testing with this, and caveat by the way with this video, of course, what I'm going to talk about, no matter what you do, this is not going to, regardless of what muzzle device you choose, you're never going to turn your AK into a precision rifle. This is always going to be, you know, a good AK will usually shoot around 3.5 to 4 MOA at best, and it might shoot more than that, it might shoot a little bit less than that, but that's generally what I've seen, somewhere around that ballpark. And yeah, it'll probably still be about that ballpark, even with a good muzzle device. Now, while I think it is a worthless endeavor, frankly, to spend a whole lot of time on trying to accurize an AK, just something as basic as this, because I do understand the big question that might come up is why even bother doing any of this testing at all? Because for me, I was seeing about an MOA to an MOA and a half increase in dispersion when I had that AR-M1 flash hider on here compared to this. If you think about it, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you start stretching this out to even intermediate distances, for example, 200 to 300 yards, an AK should be perfectly capable of making those sorts of shots. But if you think about it, 1 MOA is not exactly an inch, but if you just, it more or less is, so think about that. It's an angular measurement going up from 100 yards to 200 yards on a torso-sized target, especially if you go ever so slightly below a low percentage or even a moderate percentage type of hit. There's a very good chance you're going to be completely off target at that point, especially if you start getting wind and all of that. Just, it's not that long of range, and yeah, it can absolutely have enough of an impact to make you completely miss even a reasonably sized target. But just focusing on the AR-M1 right now. So what I didn't notice for years until I really started to delve into this was that this actually negatively impacts, particularly this muzzle device, at least on the rifles I've tested it on, terrible amount of increase in the dispersion. So for example, I'll show you some of the old groups that I did with this rifle right here up on the screen, way back from when I first was doing this whole build series, like I said, and was usually getting about 4-ish, sometimes a little bit over that, sometimes quite a bit over that, MOA with the Zenico DTK3, which I was using quite a bit at the time, and the Academia Sturm was also an okay muzzle device as far as its effect or lack thereof on the precision. What I noticed though, when I started doing more tests with the AR-M1, was usually increasing it by about an MOA to 1.5 MOA. Not great at all. And you know, I tested a bunch of other stuff as well. I just want to focus on the muzzle device because it's a pretty easy modular part, pretty user configurable, and a lot can go wrong with the muzzle device. I think it's one of the bigger factors in the precision or lack thereof. So what I have here, what I did to resolve the issue I had with the inaccuracy on this rifle, so I actually put a Reardon Suka flash hider, you can see right here. This is a face mount muzzle device, and that's what I would really recommend pretty much across the board. If you have the regular type of retaining pin muzzle device, AKs like this, then you will greatly benefit from having a muzzle device like this. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of slop in the muzzle device on how it connects with the retaining pin on a normal AK. So if you look right here, notice I'm just going to push on this a little bit. Might be really hard to see. It doesn't feel like much, and it's definitely not a whole lot, but when you're actually firing, that little bit of an effect with the inconsistent gases as this muzzle device kind of moves independently. So I'm actually going to put up some footage back when I was using the Academia Sturm. If you look really close, and I know it is hard to see, but especially on that one, you can really see the barrel whip, which is normal, especially with a light profile barrel like this. But just look at that muzzle device. You can really see it going independently of everything else on the rifle. So the effect that that has is pretty much, if you think about the crown on your bore, that's made to, it's supposed to be so you get consistent gases behind the bullet as it's exiting the muzzle, so it doesn't impart any forces one way or another onto the bullet and make it travel erratically. The problem is, even if you have a good crown, if you have either a bad muzzle device, which most of them, modern machining shops and all that, they can do the muzzle device itself correctly, but the issue is it doesn't really matter if the muzzle device is done well, because where it's connecting is really just the point of failure, where it's getting all that wobble because there's just so much slop in the retaining pin. Now, there are other solutions to resolve this. Of course, some things I've heard people do is you can rock set it on, use other thread locker to put your muzzle device on. There's other ways to retain it and really secure it on as well. But I don't really like that, because you are, of course, then losing the modularity. If you ever want to take the muzzle device off or change it to anything else for any reason down the line, then it becomes an extremely difficult task to do so. Same reason I'm just kind of personally never liked the pin and weld idea as well, as an aside. And one other pretty important reason on AK muzzle devices why I don't like permanently affixing these is these, again, if you permanently affix it, this can over time induce its own precision problem, because there's a pretty big gap between where this muzzle device kind of starts right here and between the crown of the muzzle. So what I've noticed, especially on these, is that you can get a lot of carbon buildup. And actually, if I were to take this off, I'll put up some pictures of it. Absolutely filthy under there currently. But to keep your AK shooting reasonably well, again, never going to be a precision rifle, but you will want to clean that off, because that's going to, especially as it really, really builds up, going to induce the same sort of effect as a bad crown again. So you'll get inconsistent gases exiting out of the muzzle, which is not great, because that's the last point when you have control over the bullet, and beyond that, it's just out in space. So can't do much after that. That's why in this video, I'm really recommending for just a little bit of better precision to go with a face mount. Now, this also has the added benefit, since this is a reared-in Suka, this is for the Plan B ecosystem, it, I shouldn't say guarantees concentricity, but it's much more likely to be concentric, and in this case, it is. So you can mount a suppressor to it, but just for the sake of this video, just ignore that for now. The added benefit of this face mount is it's just torqued on to the barrel. So the advantage that this has, of course, is, like I was saying about that inconsistent gases you can get behind the bullet. You don't get that with this. It is always going to be the same amount. As far as also zeroing, or have I ever seen a zero shift, I will say that I haven't really, with any muzzle device I've tested, with the exception of suppressors, usually they don't change it, or at least negligibly so, within the margin of error of how imprecise AKs pretty much always are anyway. And I did actually test this. I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. So once I put this reared-in Suka onto here, I actually got a 3.7 MOA group, which I'll go ahead and play the footage for that right now. So this is a precision test with the reared-in Suka flash hider muzzle device. You can see right there, just bare. I'm not using a suppressor with it or anything right now. So to explain how I'm doing this precision test, because it's going to look a little weird with AKs, especially with Zenico here, because it's not free floated. I'm going to be shooting and prone off of a bag. Specifically, I'm going to have this kind of built up here, and it's going to be resting right against the front of the receiver. That way there's no contact being made with the barrel whatsoever, so shouldn't see any erratic shifts from potentially inconsistent loading against it on my part. So should be as close as possible to just the true mechanical accuracy, not shooting off of a bench, because similarly that imparts different forces on it that don't result in the best true representation of how the rifle can do, or how this can do with the muzzle device on it. So that's what's going on there. For the ammo, I have 10 rounds of Farnall hollow point. See, now that the camera focused, I'm going to be firing at the top left bullseye up there. And that's actually the best that I've ever shot with this rifle at 100 yards. So it's really good. And actually, for once, I didn't see any flyers. I've always seen tons of flyers in pretty much every single precision test I've done with any of my AKs. And I'm starting to wonder if that can also be attributed to the muzzle devices and just how they're erratically moving in comparison to everything else. Now, if you have issues with the precision on a rifle already, of course, a face mount muzzle device isn't going to really fix that. For example, this PSA AK, no matter what I do, always shot really poorly. There's definitely something going on with it there. But if you have one that is iffy, if you're noticing kind of some weird flyers occasionally, but otherwise it shoots pretty well, then it could be worth either investing in a face mount, or alternatively, in a pinch, if you don't want to invest in a face mount muzzle device, since all muzzle devices are a little bit on the expensive side, then one option, just in a quick pinch, this is a test, you could just do a quick group without a muzzle device attached at all. So obviously that's not very practical in the long term. You do want something there, both just at the least to protect the threads, but also just for the added benefit of, for example, having a flash hider to not have that gigantic fireball out there. But ultimately what this all boils down to is that a face mount muzzle device, when these are nice and just torqued onto the muzzle, which I guess just as a quick addendum, as a little note, you don't want to over torque these either. That can induce its own precision problems, add dispersion to the equation. The reason for that is if these are over torqued, they can constrict the end of the muzzle and cause lots of issues. What I usually recommend, especially if you're doing one that has a suppressor adapter, then definitely torque that to spec. Otherwise, if you're just having a regular muzzle device, what I usually like to do is just get it hand tight as I possibly can, and then just do barely a turn with a wrench after that. You really don't need much torque to hold these on properly. Just suppressor changes that a little bit. But even if you torque it pretty high, for example, 25, 30-ish foot-pounds is usually what you see on the specs for flash hiders, or I should say for suppressor adapters, then no issues there either, at least from what I've seen and tested with all of them that I've experienced with so far. I hope that this video helped. Like I said, this has been a lot of kind of a troublesome part for me to figure out, so hopefully somewhere out there someone finds this useful, because it has been stumping me for a while, and ultimately I finally did figure out for me that all my dispersion issues were coming from that ARM1 flash hider, which just particularly shot poorly. A lot of the other muzzle devices out there, it's going to really depend on how well it fits to your rifle. Some of you watching, if you go this whole route and you test a bunch of different muzzle devices as well, you may not see much of a difference. I'm going to be testing this as I go forward on at least on my Wasser as well, to see if that helps, because that one's been having a little bit of issues too. I wanted to end, if you do want to get a bit better groups, or if you're trying to diagnose accuracy issues with your AK as well, again, not practical long term, but other things you can try. For example, you can try different handguards. You can try removing the handguard entirely just for like 1 or 2 groups, for instance, then putting it back on. I've noticed sometimes with how the handguard fits, it can kind of impact how the groups fly. And then there's a bunch of other much more intrusive changes you can make, which I'm not going to go into here, because I never like making irreversible changes. But if you really want to go that route, you can kind of research what they talk about on the forums and start cutting off or modifying parts, and it can help as well. But as far as just a very simple thing that you can change yourself at home, muzzle device, it does help. It does seem to help anyway. So like I said, I hope that this helped. If you have any other questions or you want to add anything with your own experiences, then by all means, I would love to hear those. Please leave those in the comments below. Any questions, I will try my best to get back to you. Other than that, if anyone's interested in the Reardon Suka right here, I will be doing a separate video just on this and how it does, my own thoughts on it, probably next week. So keep an eye out for that. If you're watching this way in the future, I will have a link in the description for it. But thank you all for watching. Greatly appreciate it, especially made it through the whole video. This one was a little long-winded, so if there's anything unclear, then let me know. Other than that, take care and see you all in the next one. See you then.